The evening sun painted the sky in warm shades of gold and orange as David slowly walked up the familiar stone path to his daughter Anna's house. His hands, marked with years of work and age, clutched a small, carefully wrapped gift, a delicate, crystal vase he had saved up for months to buy. Anna always loved fresh flowers, and he imagined she would place the vase right in the center of her dining table. David was 79 now. His back wasn't as straight as it used to be, and his steps were slower, but his mind was still sharp. Life had taught him many lessons: how to read people's true intentions, how to solve problems with patience, and how to let go of things that couldn't be fixed. But the one thing he could never truly let go of was family. For weeks, David had been looking forward to this dinner. He thought it was just a regular family gathering. A nice evening with his daughter, her husband Mark, and his two grandkids, Ella and Ryan. He hadn't been invited in a big way, just a casual phone call from Anna a week ago. "Dad, we're having dinner next Friday. You can come if you're free," she'd said in a rushed voice. She hadn't given many details, but David didn't think much of it. He assumed it was one of their usual get-togethers. He even baked his famous apple pie that morning, the same one Anna had loved since she was a little girl. The warm welcome. At first, when he reached the door, he could hear laughter from inside. The house looked beautiful, with warm lights glowing through the windows and the faint sound of clinking glasses. He smiled, feeling a little younger in that moment. Anna opened the door, her smile polite, but not as warm as usual. "Hi, Dad. You made it," she said, stepping aside. David noticed she was dressed up more than usual, a silky blue dress, her hair perfectly done. The dining room behind her was decorated with white flowers and candles. A long table was set with shiny plates and wine glasses. The moment he stepped inside, he realized something was different. There were more people than he expected. People he didn't know. Everyone was dressed elegantly, as if this was more than a simple dinner. He handed Anna the vase and the apple pie. "This is for you. Thought you'd like it," he said warmly. "Thanks, Dad," she replied, placing the vase on the sideboard without even unwrapping it. An anniversary he didn't know about. David found a seat in the corner and quietly observed. Mark, his son-in-law, was moving around the room, shaking, hands with guests, smiling that confident smile David had never quite trusted. He had always felt that Mark carried himself like a man who thought he was above others. As David watched, he overheard a conversation between two women at the table. "I can't believe it's been 10 years already. They're such a perfect couple," one said. "Yes, and what a beautiful anniversary party," the other replied. David's chest tightened. Anniversary? He had no idea this was Anna and Mark's anniversary dinner. No one had told him. He hadn't brought a special card, hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't even known he was walking into such an occasion. For a moment, he felt small, like he didn't belong there at all. But he brushed the thought away. He was Anna's father. Of course he belonged. The whisper that changed the night dinner went on, but David noticed something strange. Every time he tried to join a conversation, Mark would quickly change the topic or turn to talk to someone else. Anna looked tense, glancing at her husband now and then, as if waiting for his approval before speaking. After dessert was served, David was sitting quietly, sipping his tea, when he saw Mark lean over to Anna and whisper something in her ear. Her face changed instantly, from calm to uneasy. She nodded slowly, then looked at her father with an expression he couldn't quite read. She stood up, walked over to him, and spoke in a low voice. "Dad, I think it's best if you go now." The words hit him harder than he expected. "Go? Why?" David asked, confused. She hesitated, looking away. "Mark feels this is a private event for close friends and some family. He didn't plan for you to be here tonight." David's hand tightened around his teacup. Close family. He was her father. Anna, I'm your father. If this is your anniversary, I should have been told. I should be here." She didn't meet his eyes. "I know, but it's complicated. Please, Dad, just go. We'll talk later." The walk out. The room suddenly felt colder. David stood up slowly, placing his napkin on the table. Some guests glanced at him, curious but silent. Mark didn't even look his way. He picked up his coat, the gift, and the untouched apple pie and walked to the door. His steps echoed in the hallway. Outside, the night air bit into his skin, but it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. It was the ache in his chest. For a man who had spent his life helping his family, sacrificing for them, and being there. In every moment of need, this was a wound that went deep. David didn't know what Mark had whispered to Anna, but he knew one thing. It wasn't the truth. As he walked away into the night, he told himself, "This isn't over. I'll find out what's really going on." The dinner started out like any other family gathering David had been to over the years. Emily had invited him over a week earlier, saying she was making his favorite roast lamb with rosemary potatoes. She even sounded cheerful on the phone, and it warmed David's heart to think maybe the tension from past months had finally begun to fade. That evening, he wore his best brown sweater, the one Emily had knitted for him on his 65th birthday, and carried a small box with a gold ribbon. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet he had bought for her, engraved with the words, "Always my little girl." It wasn't expensive, but it held meaning. When he arrived, the smell of fresh bread and slow-cooked meat filled the house. Noah and Lily, his grandchildren, ran to greet him with wide smiles, wrapping their arms around his waist. For a moment, it felt like old times, safe, warm, full of laughter. Mark, his son-in-law, greeted him politely, but with that familiar stiffness in his voice, like every word was weighed before being spoken. Still, David ignored it. He had promised himself he wouldn't let anything spoil the evening. They all sat down at the table, the dishes steaming in the center. Conversation flowed, though mostly between Emily and the kids. David told a few light stories about his younger days, making Noah giggle and Lily roll her eyes with a smile. Mark barely reacted, focusing on his plate. As dessert, Emily's homemade apple pie was served. David reached for the gift box and slid it across the table to Emily. "Just a little something for you," he said softly. She opened it and her eyes widened slightly before she looked down, her smile almost forced. "Thank you, Dad," she murmured. Then, just as David thought the night had gone well, he caught something in the corner of his eye. Mark leaned toward Emily, his hand resting lightly on her arm, and whispered something into her ear. It was quiet, but David noticed how her shoulders tensed and her jaw tightened. She didn't look at him immediately. She just nodded slowly, her lips pressed together. Then, without meeting his eyes, she put her fork down and stood. "Dad," she began, her tone formal and strange, I think you should go now. It's getting late." The words didn't make sense at first. David blinked, searching her face for a trace of warmth, a hint that this was a joke. But there was none. The children froze, their eyes darting between their mother and grandfather. "Go? Did I do something wrong?" David asked, his voice low and calm, though his chest felt like it was caving in. Emily didn't answer directly. She just stepped aside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, avoiding his gaze. Mark stood in the background, his arms folded, his expression unreadable but firm. David rose slowly, his hands trembling as he reached for his coat. He wanted to say something, anything, to make her stop, to remind her of the man who had carried her on his shoulders, who had worked extra shifts to pay for her college, who had stayed up through the night when she was sick. But the words lodged in his throat. He turned to the children and managed a small smile. "I'll see you soon." "Okay." Noah's lip quivered, and Lily took his hand for a second before letting go. As David stepped into the cool night air, the door closing softly behind him, he felt the warmth of the home vanish instantly, replaced by the hollow chill of betrayal. He walked slowly down the driveway, his mind racing, trying to understand what had just happened. That simple whisper, whatever it was, had been enough to turn his daughter against him in a matter of seconds. And as the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, David realized that some battles in life are fought without raising your voice or your hand. They're fought in silence, in the spaces between words, and sometimes you lose them, without even knowing the rules. David didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small armchair by the window, watching the streetlights fade as the morning crept in. The hurt sat heavy in his chest, but beneath it was something sharper, a gnawing need to understand. What could Mark have whispered to make Emily push her own father out of her home? David knew his daughter's heart. She wasn't cruel by nature. Something had been planted there, and he needed to know what. 2 days later, David went to the park near Emily's house, knowing Lily and Noah often walked there with their mother. He didn't want to confront Emily in anger, but he hoped for a chance to speak quietly. Fate, or perhaps just the natural pull between a grandfather and his grandchildren, brought them together. Lily spotted him first, running into his arms, without hesitation.
"Grandpa, why didn't you stay for dessert the other night?" she asked, her small voice puzzled.
David glanced at Emily, who was walking a few steps behind. Her eyes met his for a fleeting second before looking away. "Your mom asked me to leave, sweetheart," David said gently, brushing Lily's hair from her face. Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. He turned to her, his voice calm but steady. "Emily, please, I don't know what I did, but I deserve to hear it from you." For a moment, it looked like she might walk away, but then she sighed, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of the past days had drained her. "Dad, Mark told me you were talking badly about him to the kids. He said you were trying to turn them against him." Her voice wavered, but her eyes stayed hard. David stared at her in disbelief. "Emily, I would never do that. You know me better than that." His voice cracked, not from anger, but from the deep sadness of being misunderstood by the one person he had loved unconditionally since the day she was born. Emily looked away, but doubt flickered across her face. "Mark said he overheard you." David stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Emily, I raised you to think for yourself. Ask the children. Ask them what I said. I have nothing to hide." Noah, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Mom, Grandpa never said anything bad about Dad. He just told us stories about when you were little. That's all." Lily nodded, gripping David's hand tighter. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, her expression softened. She turned toward her children, then back at David. I don't know why I believed him," she whispered, her voice trembling. She stopped herself, but David understood. Sometimes fear of conflict, or the comfort of believing someone you love, can make you blind to the truth. David placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady but warm. "Emily, I've made mistakes in my life, but loving you has never been one of them. Don't let whispers decide who your family is." Tears slid down her cheeks, and she finally stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. "I'm sorry, Dad," she murmured into his shoulder. For the first time in days, David let himself breathe deeply, feeling the knot in his chest loosen. Later that week, Emily invited him back for dinner. This time, the air was different, warmer, less guarded. Mark was quieter than usual, and David didn't push the issue. He knew some battles weren't won with confrontation, but with patience and truth. As he sat at the table watching his grandchildren laugh and his daughter smile through red-rimmed eyes, David realized something important. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the hurt. It's about choosing to hold on to love more tightly than the pain. And in that moment, he knew he hadn't lost his family after all.